everyone. Всім доброго дня. Я сподіваюся, що у вас все добре сьогодні. Hopefully you've got a nice weekend, not needing to work too much. And yeah, I hope everything is okay with everyone. So today we've got quite a busy stream, actually. We have a lot of things to talk about today, a lot of questions from Twitter on lots of different topics. Today we're going to be looking at the perfect and continuous aspects, so present continuous, past continuous, present perfect, past perfect, also present perfect continuous and past perfect continuous. So we're going to analyze all of these. We're also going to be talking about self-study of English, what steps you can take to improve your English alone without any help or with any teachers or anything like that. We're also going to be talking about impersonal constructions, so passive voice and causative voice as well. Conditional sentences we're going to be talking about, and also we're going to be looking at old-fashioned words as well, words that people often use but should be avoided. So I should probably say something in Ukrainian too. So усім вітаю, я дуже радий, що ви всі зі мною сьогодні. Я щойно сказав, що ми будемо вивчити сьогодні. Під час стріму, якщо у вас є будь-яке запитання щодо англійської мови, або якщо щось не ясно, або якщо ви хочете уточнити момент якийсь, будь ласка, напишіть в чаті, я все бачу, я відповім на все. І я просто сподіваюся, що це буде корисним для вас. Це найважливіше для мене. I hope it will be interesting for you. Hopefully you will learn something new. And I guess we can make a start. So the first topic that we're going to be looking at today is going to be the present continuous. Now, the present continuous is something that it seems to be very simple. It seems to be very easy. Okay, we have the verb be, then we put the verb with ing, and that's it. We use it for things that are now or around now. But actually, the present continuous has a lot of extra uses, a lot of nuances with this grammatical construction. And to start with, we're going to, of course, look at the basics about how we build it. And then after that, we are going to look at some of the more complicated uses of the present continuous and with all of the other perfect and continuouses as we continue through the stream. So let me just bring up my notepad so it's easy for me to make notes. So as I mentioned already, we're going to be starting with the present continuous aspect. Now, to make the present continuous, as I'm sure all of you know, we use the verb be in the present plus verb with ing. Now, the basic use of the present continuous is to describe actions that are happening in progress at the moment of speaking. So we can add that in, actions in progress at the moment of speaking. Just put that on the second line, just so everything will be visible. So for example, we can say something like, I can't talk now, I'm having, I don't know, a bath, something like this. I'm having shows that the action will be in progress at this time, at the moment of speaking. It also shows that the action will stop at some point in the future, but it will continue for some time after I finish speaking. So I will continue having a bath for some period of time, but at some point in the future, it will finish. And we often use this with various different adverbs. So adverbs such as now, just, still, at the moment. Expressions like these are very typical, like I'm having a bath now, I'm just having a bath, I'm still having a bath, I'm having a bath at the moment. all of these adverbs are very typically used with the present continuous to show that the action is temporary, to show that it's not going to continue forever. There is a big exception to the use of the present continuous, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, and that is the use of state verbs. Now, state verbs are a certain group of verbs that we cannot use in the continuous. It is not possible to use these in the continuous. So these are usually verbs that are in your head and don't have any action connected to them. So for example, verbs like know, understand, want, believe, love, like, hate. All of these verbs cannot normally be used in the continuous. So for example, we would say, I understand English. It would not usually be correct to say, I am understanding English. This would usually be an error. So if we have one of these state verbs where we cannot use it in the continuous, even if we are talking about right now, we still should use the present simple, because grammatically, according to the traditional rules of the English language, we cannot use this in the continuous form. One other exception to this as well is when we have two specific expressions, which are the phrases here comes and there goes. In these two expressions, we always use present simple. There's various complicated historical reasons why we don't use the continuous, but it is not grammatically correct to use the continuous with the phrases here comes and there goes. So for example, we can say something like, here comes the postman. That's fine, that's good. It would not be correct to say, here is coming the postman. So with these two phrases, here comes and there goes, it is not correct to use these in the continuous form. These are just two exceptions that you need to remember, as well as the state verbs that we talked about a couple of moments ago. Now, that's kind of the basic stuff, this idea that we use the present continuous to talk about actions that are happening now at the current moment. But the present continuous also has many, many other uses which are not so common, but which are still quite important, which we can still use, which we can still use it for. And one of these examples is that we can use the present continuous, just get rid of that for now, to talk about actions that are repeated. We can use it to describe repeated actions. And I know that at school and at lower levels, you often learn that if an action is repeated, we should use present simple. For example, I go to the cinema every Saturday. And that's true. That's not a mistake. That is absolutely correct. However, it is possible to also use the present continuous to describe repeated actions if, and only if, they happen in a limited time period. So if you put some time period around the action you are describing, even if it is repeated, it is possible to use present continuous to describe these actions. So for example, we can say something like, I'm feeding, whatever that is, I'm feeding the neighbour's cat this week while she is in hospital. Here, of course, this is a repeated action. You will feed the cat more than once, more than one time, but it's only while your neighbour is in hospital. So this is a time-limited action. And because of this, even though it is repeated, because of the fact it is time-limited, we should use the present continuous to describe this action. Another use of the present continuous, and this is one which I guess is probably quite well known for B1, B2 level learners, is that we can also use it again for repeated actions if they are annoying or irritating in some way. So, for example, we can say something like, my brother is always eating my chocolate without asking, for example. Here, we can, of course, say, my brother always eats my chocolate without asking. That's not a mistake. But here, this situation, this sentence, shows us that we are annoyed, that we are irritated, that we have some kind of emotional problem with this situation. If you just use present simple, my brother always eats my chocolate without asking, then this does not have any emotion or any feelings. It's just a fact. It's just statement of fact. He eats the chocolate. But using this present continuous, and especially adding the word always into the middle of the sentence, shows that we are irritated or annoyed, or there's some kind of problem, very simply. Like we think this action happens too often, and we don't like it very much. There are two other common situations where we use present continuous. One of the ones is in sports commentaries, which is not really very, very relevant, so I'm not really going to go into much detail for that, but very often when you hear a commentator describing some football match or tennis match, you can often use present continuous. And the other use, which is maybe more useful, I guess, is when we are telling a story. When you are learning sort of traditional theoretical English, you learn this idea of narrative tenses. Like when we tell a story, we use past simple, past continuous, past perfect. We use all of these past tenses to tell a story. But in reality, when we tell a story, if we want to make the listener feel closer to the action, we want them to feel like they are there, they are seeing what is happening, then we can use present tenses. So we can say something like, let me just remove this from here. So something like, there's an old woman with thick glasses behind the counter, and I go up to her and say, etc., etc., etc. So we can use these present tenses to describe a story that is happening to make the person sound closer to the action. And it's exactly the same as you do in Ukrainian. You can say, no, idu ya vчора, etc., etc. But you can use idu with vчора because you want to make the story sound closer to the person. And we can do exactly the same thing in English. Now, theoretically, it's not 100% correct, but people do talk like this. People speak in this way. And so because of this, it can be something that you can use if you want to emphasize a part of a story, if you want to make the person feel closer to what you're saying. For all of these situations, we can also use present continuous to make a person feel like they are part of this. Now, I also mentioned that there are some verbs that we cannot use in present continuous. And again, it's usually verbs that do not actually have an action. So verbs like want, know, understand, etc. But there are certain verbs that you can use in the continuous, but if you do, then the meaning changes. And I'm very sorry, I just need to remove this cretin from the chat. Я не знаю, звідки він, а все одно нам взагалі не треба. Okay, so we're now going to have a look at these verbs where the meaning changes depending on if you use the present simple or if you use the present continuous. There aren't too many of these. There's only 6 that I could think of when I was making my notes before this. So the first one is the use of the verb be. If we use the verb be in the simple, this is more like a statement of fact. So just put this in brackets. Be as simple is like a statement of fact. So for example, your child is very obedient. Statement of fact. If we use be plus the continuous, then here we are describing a situation which is different from usual. So, for example, if we say your child is being very obedient, this would show that usually your child does not behave very well. Your child is usually not not well behaved, and today is unusual. Today is different. So using be in the simple or in the continuous, we have this different meaning. The second one is the use of the verb have. Now, when we use have in the simple, very often it gives us this idea of owning or possessing something. So, for example, we can say they have 3 houses and a yacht. Very rich people, they own 3 houses. But if we use have in the continuous, this shows that we are experiencing something. So, for example, we can say something like, I'm having a really good time at the party. So here we are showing that we are experiencing this good time. We are enjoying ourselves. Everything is great. Everything is good. So we have the 2 different meanings here of using the simple or the continuous. The third example of the verbs is when we use the verb think. Now, with the verb think, if we use it in the simple form, think shows us that we are giving an opinion on a topic. So, for example, I think Ukraine will win the next World Cup. So here, this is my opinion. This is what I believe to be true. If you use thinking in the continuous, then this shows that we are considering something. So for example, we can say, I'm thinking about buying a new car. Here, of course, this is not an opinion. This is talking about a thought process. And so because of this, we can use the continuous to show that we are having this actual process going through our heads. Because if you think about it, when we use think in the simple, there is no action here. This is just an opinion. This is just how I feel, but there is no action. In the second one, I'm thinking about buying a new car. Here we actually have an action. There is a mental process which is taking place. And so because of this, we can use, and we should use, in fact, the continuous verb form. So, moving on to the fourth verb, which is the verb mean, which again also changes the meaning of the verb depending on whether we use it in simple and continuous. Now, if we use it in the simple, the verb mean often gives us the idea of označaje in Ukrainian. So, for example, you can say like the sign means slow down. So it's what the sign is showing us. But if we use be meaning, as in the continuous, then this shows us the idea of have the intention of doing something. So like, for example, we can say like, I've been meaning to call you all week. Here we are showing that we've had this intention to call the person. Using present perfect continuous, which we will talk about a little bit later, about the exact meaning of this. But the basic meaning of the idea of be meaning shows us that we have the intention of doing something, and it doesn't mean in the sense of označaje as mean would usually mean. Then we have 2 more. The fifth one is the verb appear. Appear has got a couple of different meanings, but the basic meaning in the simple form is the idea of seems like, or zdaється, as you would usually say in Ukrainian. So, for example, we can say, it appears that the police have found the criminal, for example. So here, again, it's like zdaється, it seems to be true that the police found the criminal. If we use it in the continuous, this is often used with the sense of performing. And it's very typical to use this for concerts, for singers, bands, groups, etc. Very often we use it in the continuous in this way. So, for example, we can say, I don't know, Kalush Orchestra are appearing at VDNH next week. So here we don't give the idea that they are just appearing, but it is the idea they will be performing. They will be singing some songs, doing some music, and that's the idea that we want to show in this situation. Okay, and the last one that we have is the use of the word weigh. Now, weigh is a slightly odd verb. So if we use it in the simple, we can say, for example, I weigh 70 kilos. Here we are just saying the weight of something. I weigh 70 kilos. The Eiffel Tower weighs 70, 80 tons, however much it is. So we are saying how much it is. But if we use the continuous verb form, then here we show the action of weighing. So here this would be an action which is in progress. So for example, we can say something like, I'm weighing the ingredients for the cake. So here we have the action of weighing. So those 6 are kind of like the standard verbs, like the most typical ones, I would say, where the meaning is a little bit different depending on whether we use the simple form or the continuous form. And one other thing that I would like to highlight is that if you have got a verb of sense, so something like hear, notice, smell, there's quite a few of these, I guess. Taste would be another one. See. If we have these verbs of sense, then usually we cannot use these in the continuous. Thank you very much, new follower. Admak дуже радий, що ви з нами сьогодні. So usually we cannot use these verbs in the continuous when they describe the sense, the actual act. For example, with see, the action of looking with your eyes. We cannot normally use this in the continuous. So, for example, something like, I see him on the other side of the road. Even though it's happening right now, because we mean to look with your eyes, we cannot use it in the continuous. If you say, like, for example, I'm seeing John tonight, now we use see in a more metaphorical meaning. And here, the verb see gives us the idea of meeting this person. And so because the meaning is different, now we can use it in the continuous. And it's exactly the same with these other verbs that I've listed with hear, notice, smell, taste. When we talk about the actual action, the using these senses, we cannot normally use these in the continuous, in the present continuous. Okay, so in principle, that's everything for present continuous. Does anybody have any questions about present continuous before we move on to another area of grammar? Водичку трохи. Okay, looks like there are no questions, so we can now move on to the other typical form of the continuous. So now we're going to move on to the use of past continuous. Now, past continuous is very similar to present continuous. First of all, in how we form it, how we make it. We use past continuous, put this in capitals, we use past continuous well, first of all, the form that we use. We make the past continuous using was or were plus a verb with ing. And like the present continuous, the past continuous usually shows us an action that was in progress at a specific point in the past. That is kind of like the typical basic form of this. So, for example, we can say something like, while I was having a bath, someone knocked at the door. Here we have this was having construction because this action was in progress when the shorter action happened of knocking at the door. So the past continuous is very, very similar to this to the present continuous in the sense of the fact that this action is in progress at some time in the past. However, again, like the present continuous, there are a lot of nuances and extra uses that we have. And not too many, not as many as present continuous, but there are quite a few. One of the main uses of past continuous is to show that an action was interrupted at some point. So an action was in progress and then something stopped it from continuing. So for example, we could say something like, I was taking... actually, let's just make a bit different example. Something like, the cars were crossing the bridge when it collapsed. So here, of course, the cars were in the process of crossing the bridge, and this was interrupted, this was stopped, because of the fact that the bridge collapsed. So using this past continuous to describe an action that was interrupted, that was stopped, it's a very typical usage of the past continuous aspect. If we have got an action which describes a past agreement, or past arrangement is maybe even a better way to describe it, we can also use this to describe past arrangements, but we don't know or don't say if the action actually happened or not. So for example, I can say something like, I was taking the next flight to Boryspil, so I had to cut short the interview. So here I am just saying that I had an arrangement, I had a plan to take the next flight to Boryspil, but I don't actually say if I am going to take the flight or not. We don't know if I took the flight or not in this case. And it's a very nice structure that you can use if you want to describe something, again, that you had a plan to do this, but you don't want to actually say whether you did it or not. And this would be a very good example of this. So you were planning to take the flight to Boryspil, but we don't actually know whether you took it or not. And one final use of past continuous, which is probably the way that I use it the most, which is a really nice sort of typical motif even of the past continuous, is we can use it to make things more polite. We can use them to make things more respectful and more appropriate if you're talking to someone who maybe you don't know very well. So for example, something like, I was wondering if you could help me. Here we have the was wondering past continuous. Something like, were you planning to go somewhere else later? Here I want to ask you the question, are you going somewhere else later? But using the past continuous makes it more polite, it makes it more respectful, and this can be a really nice way to show, just to show respect, because obviously in standard English, we don't have this, in standard English, I should highlight standard English, we don't have this ty, voi difference like you have in the Ukrainian language. And so in English, we have to have lots of different ways to show that we are being polite, we are being respectful to the person who we're talking to. And one of the best ways to do this, in my opinion, is to use the past continuous verb form. So that's pretty much everything about past continuous. Does anybody have any questions about the past continuous before we move to the perfect verb aspects? Okay, obviously not. So let's now move on. And now we are going to be talking about the use of the present perfect. Now, the present perfect is one of these verbs which it causes a lot of problems for Ukrainian speakers. And I think that this is very often, well, for two reasons. One, of course, is the fact that you do not have the present perfect verb form as we use it in English. It does not exist in the same way in Ukrainian. But also, I think that there are a lot of misunderstandings about how the present perfect actually works, in the sense of when we should use it and how we should use it. So first of all, with the form, as always, present perfect we use with have plus the past participle of the verb. Past participle is tretia forma, if you know this system. It's a little bit archaic, this system, so past participle is the correct name. And I should also add has into here as well. Now, the basic fundamental idea of the present perfect is to connect the past and the present together. That is all the present perfect does. That is all the present perfect ever does in any situation. We use the present perfect to show that the past and the present are connected in some way. Now, when we use this, there are many rules about this that I will highlight these uses of present perfect simple, but the whole fundamental idea, it all comes down to this idea of connecting the past and the present together. So, for example, if we say something like, the film has already started, we use the present perfect because it started in the past and it is still happening now. The film is still being shown at the moment. So we are connecting the past and the present together in this way. Another example of this would be something like, I've never been to, where have I never been? I've never been to Uzhhorod. Here, again, I'm saying in my life from the past until now, until this moment, I have never been to Uzhhorod. I've never visited this city. So again, we are connecting this past action with the present situation. And again, it's this whole idea of linking together, connecting together the past with the present. That is the fundamental idea of the present perfect. Another example of this is when we talk about past actions. This is often how it's taught at lower levels, with past actions, but we don't say when. So something like, for example, I've been to Lviv 5 times, for example. Again, here we're using the present perfect. Why are we using the present perfect? Because you are still alive. You're not dead yet. Szczena Merla, as your wonderful anthem goes. And because of this, we have got a connection. We have the links when you visited Lviv in the past, and this connects to the present when you are still alive. Like I said, you are not dead, you're still here. So we are connecting the past to the present again. As soon as you say a time, like for example, I visited Lviv last year, now there is no connection to the present because we have the phrase last year. There is no link. There is no connection to the present because last year is finished. It's done. It's completed. And so now we have to switch to present simple. But in the first situation, with I've been to Lviv 5 times, there is no time reference. It's at any point in your life this can have happened. And so because of this, we should use the present perfect. But again, it all comes back to this idea of past action, something in the past, connecting to something in the present. And as always, that is the fundamental idea with this. There are many typical adverbs that we use with present perfect. I will just give you a few examples of these. Words like ever, often, seldom, never, so far, already, still, yet. All of these are usually typical markers for present perfect. So, for example, we can say like, I have never experienced any problems here. Or I've received no homework so far. These are typical markers for present perfect, and so you can very typically use present perfect with these adverbs. But again, just to highlight one more time, I know I keep saying it, but it is such a fundamental concept that we use present perfect to show this action in the past is connected to the present in some way. And words like ever, never, already, still, yet, they usually show some kind of connection between the past and the present in some way. It's also worth highlighting that with with past perfect, the fundamental idea is basically the same. With past perfect, we are still forming some kind of connection. But with past perfect, we are connecting past and past together. So let's look at a few examples of this. So with past perfect, we make it by using had plus the past participle, as I'm sure you know. Just have some water just for a second. So we form it using had plus the past participle. Now, we said before that present perfect we use to connect the past and the present together. With the past perfect, we connect a past action with another past action. So, for example, we can say something like, I realized that I had forgotten my keys. Something like this. Here, we are showing that you forgot your keys first, and then later, you realize this. So here we have the connection. Here we have the one past action, which is linked, which is connected to realizing that you forgot your keys previously. And again, this is often taught with, one past action before another past action, we should use past perfect, and that is true. But the main fundamental idea is connecting these two past actions together in some way. We show the sequence of these actions. And in principle, it functions exactly the same way as present perfect, that we are just connecting these two actions together. There is one specific use of past perfect, which is not exactly with the order of words, the order of events, I should say, but using it as well to describe past intentions which were not completed or not fulfilled. Completed or fulfilled. So, for example, we could say something like, I had hoped to climb Hovela, for example, but it was too foggy, let's say. So here I am saying that it was my plan to climb the mountain of Hovela, but because of the fog, it was not possible for me to do this. Now, strictly speaking, we are still connecting two past actions together because we have the hope to climb and it was too foggy. These are linked. But in my experience with this use of past perfect, it's often better to think of it more as just remembering it as a rule of this idea of past intentions that were not completed or were not fulfilled in some way. Okay, so let's now bring these ideas together of perfect and of continuous. And now we're going to be looking at present perfect continuous and also past perfect continuous too. Again, present perfect continuous is something that often causes a lot of difficulties. And again, I think it is because of this idea that in Ukrainian you don't have this this verb aspect, or certainly not in the same way. But also there are a lot of sort of maybe more complicated rules and things like that. But the fundamental idea of it is still the same. So to make the present perfect continuous, we form this using have been plus the verb with ing. And we use this again to connect the past and present together. But this time we focus on the action. So here we are not focusing on the result. We are not focusing on whether it was completed or not. We are just focusing on the action itself and nothing more. So for example, we can say something like, I've been learning how to speak English. Here, there is no result. We are not focusing on any concrete result of this action. We are not saying that we have reached a certain level or that we know lots of words or anything like this. But what we are saying is that this action has been in progress, and we are focusing on the action itself and not on the result. Now, again, this is taught in many, many, many different ways at lower levels about actions which are unfinished, actions which start in the past and continue until now. But the fundamental basic idea is still this idea of focusing on the action at the same time as connecting the past and present together. With the continuous, we often show that an action is temporary, that it's not forever. And again, this is because we are focusing on the action itself. So for example, I can say, Helen has been spending, but has the full form, a lot of money recently. Again, here we are not interested in the result. We are not interested in what Helen has spent the money on where it has gone, but we are just purely interested in the fact that Helen has been spending this money, and that's all that we're interested in. So it's temporary, it will likely not continue forever, but the focus is on the action itself. And so because of this, we use present perfect continuous. Now, again, with past perfect continuous, it is the same basic idea, pretty much exactly the same. Here we have past actions connected together. So past perfect continuous, formed with had been plus verb with ing. And the same idea here, we connect two past actions together. But again, focus on the action. So for example, we can say something like, I had been working hard all day before, I don't know, the auditors arrived or something like this. Here we have a past action before another past action, which is the same relevancy as we had before, past connected to past. But again, here we are focusing on the action itself. We are focusing on the fact that the working is the most important thing. There is no result from this working, or maybe there is, but we are not interested in this result. We are focusing purely and only on the fact that this action took place. And that for us is the most important thing. Again, this is taught with many different things, like a situation that continued to a past action. But the whole idea of past perfect continuous is the same as present perfect continuous in the sense that we are connecting two times together, but we are focusing on the action and not on any result of the action. Okay, so in principle, that's everything about all the perfects and continuouses. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the next part? Okay, it looks like no. So let's remove all of this. Okay, so we're now going to go on to something else. I can go to like just a normal view here because I'm just going to be speaking in this case. O, czy to pojasnię? Dzięki. Дуже вам дякую. Ну, я дуже сподіваюся, що це корисно для вас. Це найважливіше для мене. So, thank you very much. Very glad to hear it. Okay, so I'm just going to... Yes, that should be okay. Okay, so I'm just going to stay like this for this next part because the next question that I was asked about was about this idea of self-study, about how we can improve our knowledge of English, without using a teacher or without having any other assistance. I'm just going to remove the chat actually just for a second because it's annoying with that. Okay, so about how we can develop our English alone without any help, any assistance or anything like this. So learning English on your own is difficult. It's really, really not easy. English is a very difficult language, as I'm sure all of you are perfectly aware. English has got lots of different такі нюанси, різні моменти. It's very, very hard. And the question the person asked me was specifically about very high-level English, like going from a fluent speaker to almost native-like. And this is probably the most difficult step in any language because a fluent speaker of the language can communicate their ideas in pretty much any situation. Like they can talk about it. Most normal everyday situations they can discuss with no problem. Going to a native level of English requires a much deeper understanding of the language. It requires you to know the culture of the country that you are in, because when you are a native level speaker, you are aware of maybe certain phrases or certain structures that people use, and if you want to be at that level, you need to be able to understand these and to use them yourself. It's like, for example, in Ukrainian, something like "Я в коридорі", наприклад. Слово "коридор", you are not going to see this in any dictionary, in any textbook, or anything that is designed for non-native speakers to get you to even to any level in Ukrainian. But this is something that, just as an example, is something that can only be understood by being part of the culture and being part of the society almost. Also, shortening of words, things like tre instead of treba or zara instead of zaras. There are certain constructions which you will never see in a textbook. And also as well, there are certain phrases which you have to be able to understand. Like in Ukrainian, if you say like "8 лет," "dam bil bambas," things like this in the current situation that we have with the Russian invasion, you're never going to see these in the textbook. And I would argue that to be able to be at a native level of Ukrainian, you would need to understand these ideas. And it's exactly the same in English. There are certain words and phrases that have become part of our culture, have become part of our society. And if you don't know these, it's going to be very difficult to sort of fully engage. Just as an English example of something like this, there is a famous line from a comedy TV show which was called Only Fools and Horses. It was a very popular comedy show in the 1980s. And if someone speaks a foreign language very well, a typical response to this is to say, "Monch tu, Rodney, monch tu." Now, you're never going to see this in a textbook. You're never going to read this or see this anywhere, but it's just something that can only be known as part of the culture. And so this is why at very high levels of English, like when you're really going deep into trying to improve your knowledge at a very sort of subtle level, I think it is so important to have a teacher, to have somebody who knows about this culture, to have someone who can explain things without using a textbook and without using these kind of materials, because I think it's almost impossible to be able to speak at a native level without having some understanding or some knowledge of these kind of cultural differences. Um, One of the suggested ideas that I often hear for learning English is from films, TV series, books, things like this, songs even, and I believe that they have their place. Like there is something to be said for learning English in this way. Excuse me, God, don't know what's going on. There is something to be said for learning English in this way, but the way that people speak in films and they speak in TV series, it's not always or even usually the same as how people speak in real communication in real life. And this is especially true of learning from songs. Um, the way that people learn from songs is a little bit. Basically, it doesn't help. Like, for example, nearly all Ukrainians know the phrase "Let it be," and most of them know it from the Beatles song "Let It Be." But I have never heard, at least as what I can remember, a native speaker using the expression "let it be" in normal everyday conversation. I've never heard this. And it's something that a native speaker they just wouldn't say this, in my experience. And so it's something where when you learn by yourself in this way, you always need to have a critical perspective of what you are learning, because songs, TV shows, films, they are designed to be enjoyed. They are not designed to teach you English. That's not what they are there for. And although they are in the English language, the language that the people use is not always in the same way as people actually use it in real life. And it's exactly the same in Ukrainian. If I started learning Ukrainian from songs or from TV shows or Ukrainian films, it's not going to be exactly the same as people actually use it in real life, because that's not how it's designed. That's not what it's there for. You know, if I'm learning Ukrainian from Zidzio films or something like that, as much as I love his films, it's not going to be very good for my knowledge of understanding Ukrainian grammar and lexis and so on. So I just think you have to be a little bit careful with this. And the other thing that is worth highlighting about this sort of development from from a fluent level to a native level, is what is the motivation? Like, why are you doing this? And this is something that you always need to consider when you are learning English or any other foreign language, is why am I doing it? What is my purpose in learning a language? In my experience, if a person can tell me why they are learning English, what their goal is, like, for example, to get a better job, to immigrate to another country, to be able to communicate better when they travel, all of those are perfectly good, logical reasons for developing your English even further. But if someone says to me that they just want to improve speaking, improve reading, okay, what does that mean? Що це означає improve speaking? It doesn't mean anything. That's not a goal. That's a process, that's a method, but it's not actually why you're learning the language. And at very, very high levels, at C1 and C2, you have to have a real motivation, a real understanding about why you are doing this, what the purpose is. And it's worth taking time just to sit and to think, okay, what am I doing here? Why am I trying to learn English? Like, for me, I'm learning Ukrainian because I live in your country. Живу в Україні вже 9 років, і для мене це дуже важливо розмовляти державною, коли я в Луцьку або в інших містах України. But if you are learning English, you need to have a reason of why you're doing it. And so the last thing I will say about this is that I think at the very highest levels, again from sort of C1 to C2, it's really important you do this with a teacher. I would not recommend doing this by yourself, just because of all the reasons that I've said, the fact that there are so many nuances, cultural notes that you need to be able to consider. And without a teacher, I think it's going to be very, very hard to do this by yourself. I'm not saying it's impossible. I think it can be done. But I think with a teacher, you will have a lot more progress and success with what you're trying to do. And so that's what I would recommend if you are at this kind of level. Find a teacher, find someone who knows what they're talking about, and then in this case, it's going to be beneficial to you. Okay, so let's now move on. And we are now going to be looking at the use of impersonal constructions. Okay, so I've got one more comment here. I'm just going to share the chat again for a second because this is quite a relevant point, as someone has said. Let's put it on here. Yeah, I mean, it's possible that you could pick up some cultural artifacts. I mean, but for example, if we take North London drill music is a very, very specific genre of music. And for 99% of British people, just because we've used UK drill as the example, most people are not going to understand this. Most people are not going to know what you're talking about. And this is one of the issues. Of course, there is a subculture and a genre, and if you are talking to people from this area, from this group, then of course, yeah, absolutely, it can be very much relevant. But I think that again, it all comes back to, okay, what is the motivation? Why are you learning English? Because if you are, for example, if your motivation is to integrate yourself into, for example, into drill music, into the music culture, into the music scene, then brilliant, yeah, absolutely, because that will definitely be beneficial to you. There's no doubt about that. But and at the same time, if we are considering everyday communication, I'm not sure how useful it would be. Because, if we take Cardi B again as an example, I mean, the way that, there's rappers like her and like Megan Thee Stallion and people like that who they often use very, very specialized lexis that I would never use in my own life. And I would say most people would not even understand a lot of this, especially British speakers, as an example. Because the differences between American English and British English, with the development of music and with the development of rap especially, there has been a strong increase in the diversity of lexis that people use. And this is kind of why we need to have almost like a standard that everybody can understand, that everybody can use. Because again, the music, the words that are used in drill or in American rap, it's not always going to be the same as the lexis that people use or even can understand sometimes. So again, I'm not saying that it's completely useless. I think that it does have its place, but it's necessary to understand the context in which these words can be used. Because, I mean, even if you spoke to me like using some drill words, I have absolutely no doubt that I would not understand everything that you told me. Because it's not a genre of music that I'm particularly interested in. But again, going back to motivation, if your goal is to talk to people about drill and to integrate yourself into the culture, then it can be useful. But again, it's all about what your own motivation. Obviously, I can't tell you what your motivation is. We all learn languages for different reasons. We're all here for different points, and so yeah, it all depends on where that comes from. Okay, all right. So let's move on now then, and let's now go on to impersonal constructions. Now, impersonal constructions in English are basically can be divided into two groups: the passive and the causative. These are the two basic types that we have. Impersonal constructions in English don't always work in exactly the same way as they do in Ukrainian. We have a bit more sort of strict structures, I would say, than you do in Ukrainian. And so we're going to have a look at a few examples of the passive voice, about how we use it, when we use it, and also then we're going to have a look at these uses of the causative as well. So let me now go back to my other screen. There we go. So let's start first of all then with the passive voice. So the passive voice, as I'm sure all of you know, the basic verb form with the passive is to use the verb be, passive voice in first, is to use be plus the past participle. That is the basic construction. So, for example, we can say something like, my bag was stolen. Here, this is obviously a construction of someone stole my bag, but it is very unusual to structure your sentence in this way. And so because of this, we just use the straight passive, my bag was stolen. Now, there are many situations when it is needed to use the passive form, but the basic idea of the passive is to put the focus onto a different part of the sentence. Доброго дня, вітаю, дуже радий, що ви з нами сьогодні. So the basic idea of the passive is to put the focus on a specific part of the sentence. Here, if we say someone stole my bag, now it's interesting that you've written that about Grammarly. I have a big problem with Grammarly, and it is about the passive voice. Grammarly hates the passive voice, and I don't know why. The passive voice is a totally normal, typical part of the English language. It's fine. It's okay. But there are some aids, shall we say, like Grammarly, which have got a real negative attitude towards it, and I don't know why. Like, even one of the most basic sentences that you ever learn in English, like, I was born in Ukraine, for example. This is passive. You know, original sentence, my mother bore me in Ukraine. That would be the original active sentence. But for some reason, there are certain groups who think that the passive is not appropriate, or it sounds... to be honest, I don't even know. I don't even know why people have such a negative view of the passive. The passive, I can tell you now, people use the passive every day. People use the passive voice for various different reasons that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. It's normal. It's okay. And I just don't understand why Grammarly especially has got such a negative view on the passive. Grammarly, I've got quite a few problems with Grammarly, but the passive voice is one of the biggest ones. So, like, just to give you this example that we have here at the top, my bag was stolen. Someone stole my bag. My bag was stolen is much more natural. It's much more typical because it is obvious who stole the bag. Like, you know, it's someone. It's got to be a person. It's got to be a person who stole your bag. So we don't need to say someone stole my bag. It sounds very unnatural. My bag was stolen is much more typical. So we can use the passive voice if something is obvious. So if it's very clear who did it. So something like, for example, he was arrested. Here, obviously, it's the police that arrested him, because only they can do it. If it's unclear or unknown who did it, like my bag was stolen, because this is someone. Men is znamo kto. And we also use it to change the focus of the sentence. So, for example, if we have something like, I ate the biscuit. The biscuit was eaten by me. Here in the second sentence with the biscuit was eaten by me, we are changing the focus. We are looking at biscuits. Like my biscuit, the biscuit is gone. The biscuit is disappeared. And this is more important than who ate the biscuit in the second sentence. So these are the three typical uses of the passive. When something is obvious who did it, when it is unclear or unknown who did this action, and also if we want to change the focus of the passive voice. Now, when we make the passive, there is a very nice construction that can be used if you wish to report something and to make it impersonal. And it's a very nice construction that we have. So what we can do is if we say, for example, something like, people say that he is innocent. Normal active sentence. We can reorganize this to, it is said that he is innocent. Because if we analyze the first sentence, people say that he is innocent, we can understand that this people say, well, people, it's not necessary, because only people can say. Like it's clear who we're talking about if you use the word say. And so because of this, we can use this it is plus past participle to report something and make it more impersonal. So it is said, it is thought, it is believed, it is considered. Any of these constructions will make it more impersonal. And usually when you're referring to things in general, like a general feeling, a general idea, then we can use it. So if you have, just as another example, like if you're at a meeting, for example, instead of saying like, we decided to raise prices, if you don't want to make it about yourself, you can say, it was decided to raise prices. This gives us the same information, but it makes it less personal. It makes you seem less responsible for what's happening in this situation. So here, again, going back to the rules that we talked about previously, we are changing the focus from we to, in this case, it, focusing on the situation and not on the people themselves who made this decision. So the passive voice can have this idea of making it a bit more distant, making you feel a little bit less responsible for what you have. And the other thing I'd just like to highlight very quickly with the use of the passive is that very often we can also use get instead of be in the passive. This is also possible. And we normally use get in the passive to show an action which was unusual or unexpected. So we can say, for example, something like, how did he get hurt? As an example here. Or then as an answer, something like, he got his hand trapped in the door. So here we are describing actions that are unusual or unexpected. And we can use get in this case instead of be. Of course, if you want to use be, it's absolutely fine. It's not a mistake. It's completely okay. But using get shows that it's a little bit more unusual and unexpected. And in spoken English, get is probably more typical in these situations than be, especially if we are describing these unusual, unexpected situations and scenarios. So, a very similar form to the passive is the use of the causative. And the causative also uses the verb get, but it's used in a slightly different way. Or we can use get or have actually in the causative. So we make the causative using get or have plus something, a noun, and then the past participle of the verb. So for example, we can say, I got my hair cut yesterday. And we use the causative to show that we pay or we ask someone to do something for us. So here, I got my hair cut yesterday. This means I paid or asked someone to cut my hair for me. If you say I cut my hair, then this usually means you did it yourself. You did not ask anybody to do this for you. But using this causative, this got my haircut or had my haircut, it usually shows that you asked or paid somebody to do it for you. But there is another usage of this. And we can also use the causative to use it as almost like as an imperative when we tell somebody to do something. So for example, if we want to say something like tidy your room, через R, we can also say get your room tidied. And the basic meaning of this is exactly the same as the imperative. There's no real difference between them, but it can just be as an alternative that we can use instead of the base imperative. But the main idea of the causative is when we pay or ask somebody to do something for us. That's the main idea with the causative. Okay, does anyone have any questions before we move on? Czy wasze буде jakieś zapytanie? Następny temat bude conditional sentences. Okay, that's a shunny. So, let's move on then, and this. So, let's now move on to conditional sentences. And conditionals are an area of grammar which, again, people often have a lot of difficulty with the conditional sentences, but they're not as scary as you might think they are. There are a few nuances, of course, there's a few little difficulties, but the basic conditionals work in the same way as they do in Ukrainian, and the more complex conditionals, of course, cause more problems, but we're going to go through each of them one by one. We'll have a look at them, and we will discuss them as we go. So we're going to start with the zero conditional. Now, the zero conditional we make using if or when plus present and then present. Now, in lower levels, you learn that we use present simple and present simple, but it doesn't have to be, not always. We can use present simple, yes, but we can also use present continuous, and we can also use present perfect as well. So there are a couple of alternatives. So just to give you a simple example of this, for example, if it rains, I take an umbrella. And here I am describing a situation which is always or generally true. So in this case, when it rains, I always take an umbrella with me. And here in this, because it is zero conditional, we can use if or we can use when. There is no difference between them. They're exactly the same in the zero conditional. They can happen at any time. They usually happen more than once. But the whole basic idea of the zero is to show that an action is always or generally true, or a fact, or this basic idea. Exactly the same as in Ukrainian, nothing special about this one. We then go to the first conditional. And the first conditional, a little bit more complicated. We make this by using if or when plus present and then some kind of future form. Now, again, at lower levels, you learn that we use if plus present simple, then will. This can be true, but will is not the only future form. There are many, many different future forms that we have in English. We do have will, but we also have be going to, we have present continuous, we have might, we have could, we have should, we have shall. There are many, many alternatives that we can use. As long as it describes the future, then it is acceptable. So, as an example, something like this. If you go to the party, you will see your friends. And we use the first conditional to describe a specific, real situation in the future. So here we are describing the fact that if you go to the party at some point in the future, then you will see your friends when you get there. all of these, when we use the first conditional, describe some kind of real situation when we are in the future. Now, one thing I want to highlight is the difference here between if and when. Because in the zero conditional, as we said, they are the same. They are synonyms. But in the first conditional, they are different. When we use the word if, we are saying here about a possible future. So if you go to the party, maybe you will go, maybe you won't go, I don't know. But when you go to the party, this means I am sure, I am certain that you are going to the party. So using when in the first conditional makes the first part of the sentence more sure. It makes it more certain if we use this when in the first part. And I also want to highlight as well that almost always, and it is almost always because there are exceptions like everything in English, when we have the words if or when, it is not normally possible to use a future form after if or when. So for example, it is usually incorrect to say if you will go. This is wrong, usually. And so normally we say if you go, when you go. We just use a present verb form after if or when. Now, obviously in Ukrainian, it's very different because we could say, no, наприклад, якщо я буду, коли я буду. You can use a future form after these words. But in English, we can't. It's not possible usually. So it's important to remember when you're creating these first conditionals that we should just use the present verb form after if and when. And then anything about the future goes in the second part of the sentence and not in the first. So let's now move on to the second conditional. Now, the second conditional we use, well, let's look at how we make this first. We make this using if plus past simple, then would plus infinitive. This is the basic structure. In reality, there are many alternatives to would. It's actually possible to use would, could, might, and should, depending on the situation, plus the infinitive of the verb. That stays the same. For example, something like, if I won the lottery, I would buy a new car. And we use this second conditional structure to describe an unreal or hypothetical situation in the present or future. So when we create this structure, this sentence, what we are saying is we think that it is impossible, or there is a very, very small chance that you will win the lottery. I mean, usually winning the lottery is a very small thing anyway. It's normally not a big chance of winning the lottery. But we use this. We use these forms to show this. Now, using the past simple, it works very similarly to Ukrainian in the sense of that if we say this sentence in Ukrainian, we would say, no, якби я виграв у лотерею, я купив би нову машину. So you would also use the past verb forms in Ukrainian, but the difference is you usually have by in both parts of the sentence. Якби я виграв і я купив би. But in English, we only use would in the second part of the sentence. In the first part, we only have past simple. There is no would here, and using would after if is usually not correct. It's usually something you should not do when we have these second conditionals. Now, it is also possible to make the second conditional very formal, extremely formal. And we can do this by rewriting this sentence like this. Actually, there are two ways we can do this. I'll give you the other option as well. So the other way that we can do it just put these in and then I will explain them. So these are the ways that we can make it more formal. We can say, if I were to win the lottery, I would buy a new car. So here, the basic structure is if plus subject plus were and then plus to plus infinitive. This makes it more unreal. It makes it more formal as well, more respectful. Like very often in negotiations, business negotiations and things like this, we often use this construction. And as an alternative, you can also put were at the start of the sentence. So using were plus subject and then plus verb as usual. Nothing changes here. This third alternative is actually an inverted conditional, which is I'm not going to go into that today because inversion is a very complicated piece of grammar. But you can remember that if you just put were at the start of the sentence, it makes it incredibly formal, and it's a very sort of almost grandiose construction that you can use here. But it is a nice way of making it slightly more formal and more respectful depending on the situation. So that can also be as an alternative. So we now go to the third conditional, and we make the third conditional using if plus past perfect. Then would have, again, there are alternatives to would, could, might, should, have, plus, and then again the past participle, the third form of the verb. And we use this to describe unreal situations in the past. So everything here is in the past and it's all unreal. So for example, we can say something like, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the test. So what this means is that I didn't study hard, and so I didn't pass the test. So the third conditional always describes about the past. Everything is about the past. And very often, it's a very typical thing when we use the third conditional to show criticism of other people. So if we say something like, if you had listened to me, we wouldn't have got lost. So here I am criticizing the fact that you did not listen to me. And so now so because of this, we got lost as well. So showing criticism is a very typical use of the third conditional. But the structure stays the same. It's still an unreal past action because, again, this sentence still has the idea of you didn't listen to me, so we got lost. It's still past action, but it shows us the fact that we are kind of criticizing you in some way when we use this. There are two more conditionals that we have in the English language, or two more common ones, I should say. And these are known as the mixed conditionals. And so we will start with the first mixed conditional, which is also known as M1. And we make this using if plus past perfect, and then would, could, might, should, plus infinitive. Now, with this conditional, we have if plus past perfect. This is from the third conditional. And then would, could, might, should. This is from the second conditional. So this is mixing together the third and the second. And we use this to show a past action with a present result. So as an example for me, if I hadn't moved to Ukraine, I wouldn't be able to speak Ukrainian. So here we have the past action. I came to Ukraine in the past, And the present result, now I can speak Ukrainian. Well, to some level, I can speak Ukrainian. So past action with present result. So here we are mixing the conditionals together, and this one I think is quite logical. I think it's quite clear to see we have this past action with the result in the present. It's fairly logical, I think. The second mixed conditional is where we can start to have a few problems. Because the second mixed conditional, let's just put the form in first. Here we have if plus past simple. Then again, would, could, might, should, have, plus past participle. Now we have the second conditional mixed with the third conditional. So it's almost the opposite way round. M1, if you remember, was third and then second. Now we have second and then third. The first mixed conditional, as we just talked about, was a past action with a result in the present. This one is almost the opposite. We now have a present situation with a result in the past. And this is where there can be difficulties, quite frankly, because it can be sometimes quite hard to understand, okay, how can this be? How can we have a situation in the present, but the result of this situation has already happened? So let me give you an example of this. It's quite a long sentence, but I'll put it in and then I will try and explain it as I can. So something like, if you had a car, I would have asked you to drive me to the train station yesterday. So as you can see, we have if plus past simple, and then would have, and then past participle in the second part. So how does this work? What this means is you don't have a car. Like, you do not have a car now. This is still true. So we have to use if plus past simple because it's an unreal situation even now in the present. So yesterday, I didn't ask you to drive me. So here we have the present situation that you do not have a car now. This is still true. But the result of you not having a car happened yesterday. And so because of this, we need to use the third conditional part in the result, even though the first one happened now. Yeah, I see the reaction. Я розумію, що це дуже складно. Я сказав би, що в українській мові це набагато легше, такі conditional sentences, бо тут я розумію, що це може бути, трохи складнішим, можемо так сказати. But one of the ways to think about this is with this if part, you need to think, okay, is this still true now? Is this still true now? If it is not true now, like, so for example, let me give you my third conditional sentence that I gave you before. If I hadn't moved to Ukraine, I wouldn't be able to speak Ukrainian. If we compare these two if parts, if I hadn't moved to Ukraine, I moved to Ukraine. Я переїхав. That's done. That's completed. I cannot change this situation. So this is all about the past. There is no way that I can change this. I moved, if so. But this situation, if you had a car, this can change. Like, you can still buy a car. You can still get, a new vehicle to take with you somewhere. So one of the ways that I often think, a good way to think about it is, can the situation change or not? So if we look at, for example, this one about moving to Ukraine. If I hadn't moved to Ukraine, this cannot change. Let me just put the full expression in just to make it easier. This cannot change. I moved to Ukraine. That happened. That's done. That's finished. I cannot change this. I wouldn't be able to speak Ukrainian. this can change. Maybe I will not study Ukrainian anymore. Maybe I will forget the language. No, so як російська мова, зараз я намагаюся забути. So this can change. It's possible to change. But if we consider this sentence, if you had a car, just move this down. So if you had a car, again, if we consider, this can change. Because you can buy a car at some point in the future. But this second part, I would have asked you to drive me to the train station yesterday. This cannot change because this is yesterday. This is done. This is finished. And so one way that you can think about this is if you cannot change this situation, you should use the part from the third conditional. And if this situation can change, then you should use the part from the second conditional. And usually that will guide you. Now, of course, I do not expect that suddenly, okay, everything is clear and now suddenly you will use mixed conditionals with no problem at all. But if you think about it in this way, it can help guide you into the correct direction. So hopefully that will be useful. But in principle, that's it for conditionals. There's nothing really else for conditionals that you need to know. They're the basic forms. Okay, so I've been streaming for an hour and a half, so I think it's probably time I had a little break and had a cup of tea or something. So дуже вам дякую, що ви були з мною сьогодні. Я сподіваюся, що це було корисним. Я сподіваюся, що ви всі в безпеці. Звісно, ми всі розуміємо, що це дуже складний час саме зараз. Я сподіваюся, що це, я сказав, що це було корисним, що це цікаво. Я бажаю вам всім гарного вечора, гарного дня, гарного вечора і до наступного разу. Бережіть себе, слава Україні. До побачення.